Thank you, everyone who could join us. Um, just want to go over our agenda for today. First, we want to talk about two of the great sessions we have at the upcoming GovAI Summit being hosted in San Jose, November 5th and 6th and 7th if you are a government agency. So hope we can see everyone there. Then we have a wonderful guest speaker here today, Sarah Fox with Carnegie Mellon, who is going to be talking about some of the work that she's doing. And finally, we are going to be talking about stakeholder mapping. This is part of the exercise we like to do in each of the committee meetings to help build our handbook so we can all use it to go out and engage the public on AI. So with that, going to jump right into the GovAI Summit sessions. We are very lucky that we get to have two sessions at this year's summit. The first will be on Wednesday, the first day, and it's a report out of all the great work we are all doing on engaging the community. So it's going to be really nice. Not only is he going to share the work that this committee is doing with others in the coalition who don't have an opportunity to participate, but it's also going to share and spotlight some of these great stories that we hear in each of these meetings. It's going to be really nice. And then very excited for Thursday's session. This is where we're going to, as much as we can, we have an hour, we can get a lot done. We're actually going to work on different case studies to help build engagement guides, depending on what level you're looking for engaging the public on AI. Work through those sessions so you have really just like a how-to, easy, almost like a boot camp. So you're ready, you have something to go, and you can go out and engage the public. So it's going to be a really great session. Meg, do you have anything you want to add about the summit sessions?
We're still taking nominations for projects to spotlight, so if you have any nominations for us, please get in touch.
Yeah, fine. Great plug. Thank you. All right. And with that, Meg, I'm going to keep asking you if you can introduce our excellent guest speaker today. Very excited to hear about the work that Sarah is doing.
Thank you so much. So, we wanted to make sure that we spotlight the work of an incredible researcher in the field who is working with a lot of labor unions on their working environments. And the reason it's relevant to community engagement is that often a small organization is just pushing AI through and not so sensitive to the conditions on the ground. But as you'll see from Sarah's work, there is so much that is overlooked and lost when you don't deeply immerse yourself in the existing working conditions of or services, service providers, any of the functions that you might be replacing with AI. So I think that something to pull out from this work for our purposes is how engagement isn't only with the broader public, but with specific constituencies. And Sarah's work is a great example of who we should be listening to and why. So without further ado, Sarah Fox.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited to be in conversation with you all. Is it okay if I share slides, Meg?
That'd be perfect.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, I'm sending a request.
You should be able to share now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And I will play. And can you see my screen?
Oh yeah, looks great.
Okay. As Meg kind of introduced, I'm Sarah Fox. I'm a faculty member in human-computer interaction at Carnegie Mellon University. And I run a lab here called the Tech Solidarity Lab. And the project I'll talk about today is a collaboration with the Transport Workers Union, the Amalgamated Transit Union, and the AFL-CIO Technology Institute. And it's essentially centered on the idea that public transit operators should have a seat at the table when decisions are being made about the design and implementation of autonomous technologies within their industry. And in fact, this is a pretty kind of apt day to have this discussion because there is a technology software company, VIA, which maybe is kind of present in some of your municipalities, that has recently partnered with Waymo to use kind of robo taxis in place of traditional forms of microtransit. So this is definitely kind of an emerging and kind of accelerating topic. So over the past several years, just to give you a sense of context, the Department of Transportation's funding initiatives have made possible dozens of autonomous vehicle pilot programs across the country. And many of these pilots involve small kind of pod-like shuttles that carry just a handful of people. So maybe like 6, 8, 10 people max. But there are also plans to deploy larger full-size autonomous buses as soon as this year in the United States. So there's a firm called AdazTech and that has deployments in Michigan and Buffalo. And by examining some of these early pilots that were funded by the DOT, we can actually begin to see how AI is set up to be deployed in real world transit systems, shaping the future of public transit in ways that go beyond kind of speculation or hype or some of the kind of media narratives that really dominate the discourse. So as a part of this work, we've examined grant reports from the FTA, the Federal Transit Authority, and accident briefs from the National Transportation Safety Board. And to kind of illustrate some of the challenges that these pilots have faced in deploying autonomous systems, I'll begin with a brief story that kind of illustrates some of the issues from a recent pilot. So it was a typical afternoon in Las Vegas as an autonomous Navia shuttle glided along its route. The operator, a seasoned bus driver, sat in the back, his role reduced to monitoring. The shuttle handled the driving for the most part until a man began backing up toward the vehicle. The shuttle sensors detected the truck and brought it to a stop. But the truck kept coming, and the operator really needed to take control. But the shuttle's design left him with few options. The manual controls, which would have allowed intervention, were in a compartment out of reach. And when he finally accessed them, he was not met with the familiar steering wheel or pedals, but an Xbox controller. So this was an interface entirely different from the equipment that he was trained on, unless maybe he happened to be a gamer. And there was no quick way to switch into manual mode. So designed for routine operation, this vehicle had failed in an unexpected scenario. Unable to react in time, the truck collided with the shuttle. Later, the operating company of the vehicle explained that the manual mode was never intended for emergency use. I'll just stop right there and repeat that. The manual mode was never intended for emergency use. So stripped of standard controls like a steering wheel, brake pedals, or accelerator, the operator was left unprepared when things went wrong. And so this incident wasn't just about a crash, it was about the vehicle manufacturer's failure to account for the necessity of human intervention when it mattered the most. And there are a few ways that you could interpret this. So perhaps it was an oversight of human factors engineering, so the accident exploiting an fundamental design flaw that the operator had essentially been an afterthought. Or you might interpret it a little less generously. So it was a design decision that reflects an act of hubris, so reinforcing the illusion that the driver isn't needed ever or at all. Either way, the setup assumed that the operator can seamlessly adapt to a gaming style controller, ignoring the expertise that they actually have. And the results, it's a system that kind of undermines the very safety that it purports to enhance. So this incident highlights a broader question. What happens to operators when automation shifts their role? To answer this, we've examined not only these kind of high-profile failures like this one, but also the everyday realities of bus operators' work today. So we've used a mix of observational and participatory methods to set out to understand how traditional operations and the ways emerging technologies are set to reshape drivers' roles. So we've paired several kind of methods to gain a comprehensive understanding of bus operators' work. So we began with observations of regular bus operations, which were complemented with group interviews. These group interviews allowed us to explore operators' perspectives on their daily tasks and challenges. Additionally, we conducted a diary study with 57 operators, which generated over 2,000 entries and more than 100 hours of interviews. And a diary study, essentially, for those not familiar, is basically asks the operator to write a daily work log about their experience. So, what they encountered on the job, what tools and technologies they used, kind of any issues that arose and how they troubleshoot them, things like this. So this combination of observational and self-reported data provided a rich, detailed picture of operators' routines, experiences, and the kind of everyday challenges that they face. In parallel, we conducted supplemental observations to explore the role of operators in emerging technologies. So we visited A/B testing site to observe how operators interact with autonomous vehicles in a testing environment, providing kind of insights into the specific challenges and responsibilities tied to this new technology. We've also observed teleoperations at an AV operation company where operators remotely monitor and control autonomous vehicles from afar. And this helped us to understand how these roles differ from traditional bus operation tasks and the ways in which teleoperations might evolve in the future. So these remote operators kind of monitor multiple vehicles at a time. So I think the kind of like current like average is like maybe 5 vehicles at a time, but certain kind of industry actors have like proclaimed that they want to get to 100 vehicles per remote operator, just to give you a sense of how this might escalate. So through this multi-method approach, we gained a deeper understanding of not just how automation is reshaping operators' roles, but also what their work truly entails. So beyond the technical aspects of driving, their job requires constant adaptation, problem solving, and vigilance. And so this brings us a key insight from the research that operators' work is defined by their ability to expect the unexpected. So this means navigating unpredictable conditions and environments where whether it's dense urban streets filled with pedestrians, cyclists, or impatient drivers. It might mean battling weather, whether it's heavy snow, making roads impassable, or flash floods, turning a routine route into a dangerous one. It means adjusting to ever-changing cityscape through road construction, detours, special events, unexpected closures. It also means being more than just a driver. So operators frequently provide critical information to social services, hospitals, shelters, connecting people to the help that they need and when they need it. It frequently means just de-escalating conflicts on board, so stepping in to prevent harm before it starts. It means staying vigilant, not just inside the bus, but also outside too. So keeping an eye on the streets, waiting for passengers or watching for passengers who may need assistance, and sometimes being the first to notice when something is wrong. There were actually probably like half a dozen instances of operators actually kind of waiting with children who were lost, for example. It also means responding to medical emergencies, calling for help, and sometimes even saving lives. And perhaps most importantly, it means providing a sense of security and care in public space, a space where so many people rely on them, not just for transportation, but also a feeling of safety in an unpredictable world. On rural roads, while pedestrian traffic and road construction were less common, there was wildlife to watch out for. So one operator, Brianna, described, you always have to watch out for bears crossing the road, deer parading through, ducks and their babies, and of course, people being the last of those. Beyond accident avoidance, rural operators also had to remain vigilant for passengers waiting to board. So some routes lacked designated stops or adequate street lighting, making it difficult to spot individuals who might be waiting there, especially those wearing dark clothing. Operators emphasize the need to stay aware of their surroundings as well. So this meant scanning the scene outside the bus, responding to potential safety concerns. So Jose, for example, who was an operator, noticed a man sitting in his car for hours along his route, and he kind of sensed that something was wrong. So he stopped to check on him, only to discover that he had suffered a stroke. And thanks to his intervention, the emergency services were called and the man received critical care. Another operator described kind of being in the driving zone, which allowed operators to anticipate risks, whether be slowing down for a child at a crosswalk or taking direct action when needed. And while we just distinguish these kind of like on-road and on-bus responsibilities, operators don't really see their role as narrowly defined. They consistently describe themselves as public servants, of using their discretion to protect and support their communities in any way that made sense. And even deciding to intervene involves kind of complicated circumstances and may engage kind of skilled capacity for social judgments, which often builds off years of experience. So one operator named David recalled a particular incident where he felt compelled to subtly intervene, even when constraints of bus operation make intervention complex or potentially dangerous. So he said, I noticed a young girl sitting next to a man. She looked absolutely terrified. There were tears coming down her face. And I'm looking at that and I asked her if everything was all right. And she kind of, her eyes got really big. She didn't say anything. And the next guy was like, oh, she's my cousin. He was drunk. It just didn't sit right with me. So I said, why don't you come and sit here with me? So the young girl got up and sat down next to me. And she whispered to me and says, please don't let that guy off at the same stop. And not letting him off at the same stop was exactly what the driver did. So the girl went to the front door and her cousin went to the back. The driver opened the front door, but not the back, and let the girl off without him. The operator recalled, we continued about a good 8 blocks and he was yelling and screaming, I'm going to kill you. And the driver described feeling deeply moved by this incident, proud of what he was able to protect, even if it meant putting himself at risk. And this operator and others later noted a dynamic where they recognized something wrong and kind of feeling empowered and responsible to act. So from our empirical research, we found that bus operators' labor frequently exceeds the capacity of automation technologies. And even on fixed bus routes that are often thought of as the most automatable, bus operators regularly describe confronting unexpected circumstances, both in navigating the road and managing the social environment of the bus. These circumstances often required split-second decision-making and nuanced social judgments. And in fact, it is sometimes through their driving role that they're able to manage the social environment of the bus and the well-being of their passengers, like with this kind of previous incident I described with the driver opening the front and not back door to protect the girl. Across each interview, operators emphasize that their role is centered on expecting the unexpected, going above and beyond to ensure the safety, comfort, and mobility of a diverse ridership. So with this work, we argue that the distance between bus operators and those advancing autonomous vehicle technologies paves the way for a kind of reductionist view of bus operators' work and the introductions of technologies not well attuned to the full range of circumstances that they contend with. Essentially, they don't know because they don't kind of interact with or ride the bus. So rather than replacing workers outright as pitched by AV firms, we expect that automation will instead gradually transform the driving role of bus operators. And we additionally argue that buses may become less safe if operators are positioned as only fail-safes for imperfect automation, or kind of shock absorbers, to use that metaphor. So if not well designed, this could lead to punctuated moments of intense engagement, like we saw with the kind of opening vignette in Las Vegas, or increased cognitive burdens where they're having to monitor multiple kind of alarms and alerts at once, instead of kind of just being able to drive the bus. And then, of course, with any data-driven technologies, there's the potential for increased surveillance and heightened managerial control. So we suggest that bus automations should be collaboratively designed with operators and premised on an integrated human-machine teaming approach. And there are lessons to be learned here from aviation, where automation has not only improved safety, but improved job quality for pilots. So over time, commercial pilots have become more highly trained, and their expertise has been taken more seriously in the design of human-machine teams. We argue that bus operators, too, should be treated like the skilled professionals they are and involved early in the development of emerging technology for transit. And toward this end, our ongoing research is using participatory design to develop advanced driver assistance technologies specifically designed for transit, using this human-machine teaming approach. So in elevating worker voice, we've already identified a range of technologies meant to address issues specific to transit, focusing on enhancing accessibility features, communication between passengers and drivers, while also balancing cognitive load of additional kind of forms of communication. And then working to mitigate pedestrian kind of accidents with pedestrians and cyclists, among others. So one ongoing project I'll just briefly describe is a collaboration with our union partners, as well as a vendor for bus scheduling software. So a focus on scheduling comes from a two-part concern. So operators regularly report skipping breaks and being unable to go to the restroom due to impossible kind of algorithmically defined schedules that really optimize for on-time performance, as opposed to kind of being something that is that incorporates the kind of the need for breaks and things like this among drivers. On the passenger side, there's a kind of well-documented issue of passengers with disabilities being passed, due largely to the tight schedules that operators are under. So not stopping, knowing that it will take more time to assist, which is an obvious, like, critical problem and a violation of the ADA. So this project seeks to address the issue, like unrealistic schedules with bus drivers, transit agency staff, software vendors, and rider advocates. So today, like I mentioned, schedules are optimized to reduce wait time, but do not adequately take into account traffic, special events, detours, or the need to assist passengers. So bringing stakeholders to get together to develop kind of more worker and rider-centered scheduling practices is really about kind of integrating those stakeholders' feedback into the scheduling systems, and then offering up policy recommendations for more sustainable transit operations. And these are kind of insights that are being actively incorporated into the KPIs for the software company as well. So despite what may seem like an inevitability, transit automation is also actively being challenged in some municipalities. So one of the kind of locals for the Transport Workers Union have actually kind of leveraged research within autonomous vehicle research to seek protections in their workplaces. So they secured first of its kind contract language with the Central Ohio Transit Authority that gives them the right to veto on the deployment of autonomous vehicles and other technologies, and actually protects workers from layoffs, even if that technology is implemented. And you can see in this op-ed, the future of transit should be determined by people, not big tech, the ways in which workers are pushing back on the kind of ideological logics that situate automation as a kind of inevitable or an apolitical marker of progress. They're kind of showing their own will and resistance. So in charting a kind of worker-centered vision for the integration of automation within transit, we seek not only to counter prevailing narrative about autonomous public transport, but also imagine more just alternatives that kind of take into account multi-stakeholder needs and the kind of real operating context of public transit. We also learned of numerous health and safety issues that were not adequately being reported when we did our diary study. So these things, because they weren't reported, couldn't be investigated or mitigated either. Namely, an overwhelming number of assaults on drivers. So when we did the diary study, we found that over 50% of drivers that were participating in the study had been assaulted themselves, and all of them had knowledge of somebody in their company who had been assaulted, either verbally or physically. So in response to that, we've developed a policy brief that pushes for more non-punitive reporting mechanisms. And this is kind of circulated through kind of the Federal Transit Authority and also the DOT, where we've delivered briefings and things like this, and has contributed to kind of new federal rulemaking around mitigation of assaults. So just to kind of sum up in a slide, some of the kind of key points or insights from this study of potential AV technology in bus transit. A reductionist view of bus operators' work obscures the full range of circumstances they contend with, which exceeds the capacity of autonomous vehicles today. Bargaining and policy work offer distinct approaches toward continued transit safety. Barriers to safety reporting are widespread, but kind of a worker's inquiry via things like a diary study creates space for workers to reassert their agency and need for change. And with that, I'll say thank you, and I'd love to kind of take questions and discuss.
That was absolutely amazing, Sarah. Thank you so much. I've really been looking forward to spotlighting this work. Who has questions for Sarah? Also, Liz, if you wanted to jump in at all. Oh yeah, Albert.
Oh yeah. And Liz, if you gotta say something, please do. But I just had a question because Sarah, this is super cool. Um, I thought your comment around like what we saw in the airline industry was pilots got more sophisticated and right, like my understanding, I don't know too much about pilots, but that there's some autonomousness to the flying, but we still have the pilots and they're doing essential work. Um, if we use that pass as an example, like do you know what happened during that transition? Was there in like did the number of pilots substantially change? Did we like increase just the number of routes that we can do? Or I'm just curious if there's more insight you have on that example.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's still a lot of like advocating in that space to retain like co-pilots and so on. So it's not like a settled thing either. I don't want to like portray it as such. There's
Yeah.
also even proposals for like self-flying planes. So it's not like that impulse is gone. But I do think this kind of recognition of them as kind of experts and the need for continued training, because of things like phenomenons like skill atrophy, like the longer you work with automation, the you will have kind of less and less sharp skills, if that makes sense. So that's something that was kind of recognized in research in aviation. And so the kind of need for that continued training, that ongoing professional development is something that was like honed in that industry as a result. And so I think it's not it's not that these are not kind of ongoing debates, or there aren't efforts to like maybe reduce the number of pilots or do away with pilots altogether. But through kind of research and a committed advocacy, we have what we have today, which is like widely respected. And I think many people feel safer because of the kind of redundancy and automation and people, right, operating the plane.
Thanks.
I know Sarah, and oh, you know what? I don't want to jump in before Lyndon. So we do have a really great question from Lyndon. Are there any studies of the impact of presence or absence of humans on the public safety of train systems? In the San Francisco Bay Area, for example, there's anecdotal perceptions that the highly automated BART is less safe for passengers versus old school cow trains.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that I can't point to like a specific report, but certainly like the phenomenon of like passenger safety in some of these transportation systems is very well studied, even in like buses and shuttles. It's one of the first like research questions that researchers had was like, how comfortable would people be with something like this? And one of the kind of key findings is that women are not comfortable with this because of the threat to safety that they felt would be likely. So that's just like one quick response, like on the perception side. But in terms of kind of train safety, like one thing that you will see though is attendance, right? So it wouldn't be the operator performing that role, but you would have something like a ticket taker who would reinforce a sense of safety, or just a safety attendant, or a security guard. And so, there's that kind of analog. But I will say, in terms of train automation, it's a much more constrained environment, obviously. The tracks are designed to be um, uh, driven over. The bus is a highly unconstrained environment, like very dynamic, and so technically it's much more difficult to master that. And and the kind of levels of complexity are just orders of magnitude larger. So
Thank you. If we could end on one last question, it's, in this group and other groups of the coalition, they're talking a lot about upscaling for employees, right? Getting them prepared for the new future. Do you know of any examples of transit agencies who are seeing this, and it's not an either or between autonomous vehicles and bus drivers, but they're looking at upskilling their drivers so they can work with these new technology?
yeah, so um, the International kind of Transit Workforce Center has really good resources for driver assistance technologies. They produce like curriculum and webinar for transit agencies all the time that are like pretty up to date and good. But even just like more locally, there are a few kind of pilots that I'm familiar with where the AV shuttles, so not a full size bus, but a shuttle, is operated by like our union partners members, and they've been involved in kind of like observing the training that's offered by the vendor, and then also kind of filling in where the details may be a little thinner, this kind of thing. But kind of there is a lot of variance between vendors in terms of the kinds and extent of training that's offered, or if that's maybe like an additional cost, if to the procurement and things like this, or ongoing training. And the ones that I'm familiar with, at least, are like largely like video based. So like not actually operating the vehicle per se, but like behind a computer, like doing a series of video trainings. And so I've had kind of limited insight to that because it is proprietary, but I would love to see more like on-road training with the technology, considering that there is a lot of there is a strong push to remove things like steering wheels. There's a lot of like recently the federal government has changed regulations around like what is required, like exemptions for steering wheels and things like this, windshield wipers, on autonomous vehicle technologies. And so that's a big shift, really different to what many people are used to operating. And so I'd love to see like more actual like training on the vehicle with those differences.
So, thanks, Sarah. And thank you for taking all this time and answering these questions. For the audience, we have about 4 minutes left for questions. So, Ryan, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Sarah, for the presentation. My question is actually kind of similar to what Meg has asked in the chat, but I'm just curious for your thoughts on the broader adoption of your findings to kind of a municipal IT setting where we're hearing from employees about, fears and concerns about AI tools and how they might impact their day-to-day work. So
Mhm.
I think I like the idea of doing some sort of diary study and having folks document concerns and instances where these things are more to the forefront. But I don't know. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that question.
It's a great question. And I think one thing that we've been doing, I'll say, like we did the diary study with operators in kind of regular operations, just a regular bus, manually operated bus. But we've also been doing it more recently with the folks that I talked about, the members who are actually safety operators for the AVs. And there are many fewer of them, but even just like the like initial things that we've learned are really interesting. The ways that they have to kind of troubleshoot and negotiate like on the ground really bring layers to this notion of like, you know, full automation, right? Like they there was an incident I'll just highlight really quick where the bus was so it effectively like moves along an invisible track that was like that's pre-mapped when it's initially tested and deployed. And there was one day where there was, unbeknownst to the operator, there was a software update and it started moving in response to things that weren't there anymore. So it like moved out of the way for a car that was previously parked in like a particular spot on the route. And it totally freaked out the operator, riders, and it was people couldn't figure out what was wrong. And it happened that like the one of the software developers like pushed a previous version of the map, and they couldn't get a hold of him because he was in New Zealand, because of the time difference. And so these are just the kind of like on the ground realities of like deployment and like working with this technology that you wouldn't know unless you were there doing it. There are a bunch of other things, but that one example I think kind of like crystallizes that it, you know, the kind of issues of like troubleshooting on the ground and like the when you're working with like multinationals, like how to like kind of mitigate issues or resolve issues as they arise can be kind of tricky. And especially if like the kind of support line is itself AI, that's even trickier. So so I think like getting a sense of that like at like deployment time or at like a pilot phase could be really important for figuring out like how do we enhance the train, like maybe the kind of like boilerplate training that the vendor is providing. Like how can we tell them how it actually works? What are the like shortcomings? Like what are the workarounds? Like these kinds of things, like the kind of reality of actually working with and alongside this technology such that it's less about kind of being an AI wrangler and more about like using it in the ways that it's like actually productive.
Sarah, thank you so much. Thank you for the great presentation. I want to apologize to everyone who still has their hands up and questions in the chat. This is great, and we could probably keep talking, probably even more than an hour today. So please forgive me for the hard stop, but we are going to move into our exercise for the day on mapping stakeholders. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Meg.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Liz. So, Sarah, thanks again, and thanks everyone for the discussion. Uh, we are in the process of creating a community engagement handbook, which it's hopefully not only going to be a resource to us in this room, but for all of the more than 800 members in the coalition, when they're ready for this work, then there's a guide for them to jump in. So, if you would please navigate to this link, we would like to do a lightning round where we capture some guidance uh, by drafting together. What would you say to explain stakeholder mapping to others? Up here, and let's see if I can't share really quick too. Um, so I'll take notes as you go, but we're hoping to draft here just as a team what stakeholder mapping is, what kinds of questions folks should ask, and anything else that comes up for this step in the community engagement process. Who wants to be the brave person who kicks this off? Because we're just going to do this really quick, and then Liz will share some more resources for us.
Are we supposed to start typing in there or?
Oh yeah, you can shout out, you can type. Now that you've unmuted Sarah, I'm going to put you in the hot seat and say what you wanted to say. And as folks are sharing out loud, I can also help capture. But this is a collaborative pad for everyone to write together too.
I think of stakeholder mapping, if I'm thinking of it correctly, is like where you're seeing who's the most interested versus their influence or their power over a given situation. And that's their interest compared to everything else they have going on.
I love that way of jumping in. And let's think about when you say who's interested, tell me a bit more about that. Like what kind of interest?
In this case, I don't know. I would just think like what area they might be interested in and or I don't know, I'd like someone else to jump in there.
That's a really great start. Thank you so much, Sarah. Who else wants to get in on this?
Ooh, I'm trying to say this uh right. I find very often as we think about community engagement in just like a city context in general, there is both I need to understand who is interested in the project and who is vocally interested in the project. You know what I mean? I need to both understand I need to reach my entire community and how do I make sure I reach my entire community and also attend to the loud needs of there's a particular group of folks that whether it's their interest or they're usually involved in the community, like how do I make sure that they are also heard in this process because just from a running the government standpoint that is important for keeping things smooth.
I dig that. That resonates for sure. So, yeah, you have to think about reaching the larger community. You have to think about keeping those like repeated um participants in
Repeat
the
customers,
room.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah, tell
exactly.
me.
And this is just I would say how do you reach them and the louder folks? I don't want to say it's like a versus type of thing, but if maybe it is the balance there. So anyways.
No, that's a good edit, not having a versus. I also like to think about direct versus indirect stakeholders. So our direct stakeholders are going to be the folks who are specifically using the system. In the case of, in Sarah's case, it would probably just be the operators, the remote teleoperators who are making sure that the AI isn't going to hurt anyone. It could have all, depending on how you think about it, it could also be the passengers. Um, but then there's also indirect stakeholders, which are the people who are affected. So maybe not people who are using it, but yeah, bus drivers, or if they're monitoring it, they might still count as direct stakeholders. But cyclists and pedestrians are indirect stakeholders because they're not directly using the system, but they're still impacted. Who else wants to add some questions that they use when they're thinking about stakeholder mapping? We're just trying to make this as like comprehensive as possible.
So I would like to add, I think it's very important to be intentional. That with stakeholder mapping, really you ask these questions because you are being intentional and you're thinking about who's being impacted by these projects. So it's not, oh, it's just a general, you're going to the same people every time. It's really thinking and making sure people are being included in the process.
Absolutely. So another few moments on this before we lightning round go to our next thing.
Hey
But
Meg,
yeah,
hey, this is Lee. I was just thinking,
great.
in addition to the primary, secondary, I'd put in influencers of those groups. Maybe that's the vocal side, but it's people or groups that hold decision-making power that can help kind of and we whether they're faith leaders or union folks or electeds, whatever they are, right?
That's such an important point, Lee. Thanks. And, some of the questions we have in here already are about who works with these groups. If you were trying to explain to somebody who's never done it before, Lee, how would you reach, and you could come up with an example maybe from Sarah's, Sarah's presentation, how would you help someone understand like how to back up into the influencers of those groups?
I don't know if I have a good enough answer for this. I remember a story out of Philadelphia where we started a project there in Philly. We started looking at routing and route optimization, and we installed the partner there installed tablets into the vehicles, and we found that the drivers were smashing the vehicle tablets because they thought they were being monitored. And it was just a simple communication effort. There was a breakdown between the installation, the use, the efficiency, and optimization, and the idea that they were being monitored or that would hurt them in the long run. And so it's just this, where are they going for reliable information, and how are you getting the participants engaged in that way?
That's a great example. Yeah, thinking about who's a trusted person to liaise with. Thank you. Does anyone else have an example for us of their stakeholder mapping exercise?
Meg, I'll just share. It sounded like you were asking the question, like, how do you find or figure out who the influencers are of a group? Um, and I was puzzled by that for a second because um, how do you find that? One very concrete way that has helped me a lot is taking a walk through existing community events. Like very, very bare bones. If you walk through a community fair and just see what tents are set up there, you're gonna get a decent sense of who the influencers are in that area. Um, I'm not saying that's a perfect method, but I'm thinking as a way to get started, especially for those folks that just don't know where to begin, finding the community events that are happening, like the big ones, for San Jose, we have like Viva Calle, which is like they shut down like 10 miles of street and it's for the whole city. Um, whoever's there, um, it's probably a good place to start.
That's such a great tactic. Thanks for that, Albert. And in the interest of time, I'll hand it back to you, Liz, for some of our more resource sharing portion.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Meg.
everybody.
So, want to start, put everyone on the spot with a show of hands. Um, have people heard of IAP2, the organization, before? Excellent, Sarah. Ryan, I know you have because I see you and you're on cameras. Excellent. So that's great. So that's a great place. I'm excited. So IAP2, for those of you who aren't aware, it's the International Association of Public Participation. Specifically, there is a chapter in the US. It's IAP2 USA and Canada. But really, IAP2, it sort of sets the standard for public participation around the world. So it's not even just to the US. It's global organization. And IAP2, for a number of years, besides providing a lot of great training and how to engage with the public and best practices in facilitation, um, it has a lot of educational materials really on just explaining what public engagement is. And it's a great place to start if you're new to the engagement world. So IAP2 has this, and it's on the screen now. It's called the Spectrum of Public Participation. And really, it's a great way to think about at what level do you need to engage the public on a project. It can be a very small project. If we're government agencies taking away from technology, it could be, oh, what are the new play structures you want in a city park? And it can go all the way up to not only developing a master plan, but thinking about initiatives on how you fund your services going forward. But I just want to bring this up because really IAP2 in all engagement guides, that's the base of engagement guide. So as we're moving towards our handbook, really to think about these levels of engagement, they go from the level of, again, just informing, letting people know what's going on, because it's very important, especially for those of us in government agencies, to be transparent in the work we do since we work for the public, all the way to empower, where that's really putting the decision in the public's hand and we are just instruments of implementing it. The thing I always like to say is each levels in the spectrum, there is a lot of gray areas between the levels, but each one is valid. And it's very important to think about what each of the levels of the spectrum mean and what you need. How can you right size it for your project? So for inform, again, that's just letting people know what's going on. Consult if you need an example of that, that's normally when you're coming down to a final decision and maybe it's choice between A and B. It might be at a city council hearing. Involve, that's normally when you are involving the public in multiple steps, maybe ideating with them at the beginning to get ideas if it's in a neighborhood, get ideas on maybe what issues they're facing, and then coming back to them once you've heard those issues and say, hey, these are some great ideas we have to help solve your issues. While collaborate is much more in depth and it's working with them not only to ideate the problems, but working with them through the solutions. It's not just coming back, it's every step of the way. You're partnering with members of the public to work through these issues and find solutions. And empower, again, that's where it's up to the public and you're there to implement it. So just want to bring this up because we're going to keep talking about this. If you come to the Thursday session at the Coalition Summit, the exercise we do is going to be based on the different levels of the spectrum. So just want to we're going to keep bringing it up over and over because it's a great resource. And the last thing, just quickly before we run out of time, because we only have a few minutes left, is something that we have been working on and we'll talk about more. We have a lot of technologists in the room, so we probably have more project management experience than engagement experience. So thanks to the great work of someone here in Salt Lake City, Haley Leak, she's our innovation team lead. She has that great combination of project management experience and engagement experience. She has actually incorporated the IAP2 spectrum into a RACI template. So I think most of us here have experience with RACIs, thinking about when you're looking at tasking your project, who's responsible, who's doing the work, who's accountable, who has to approve, who are the sponsors of that, who needs to be consulted. So that, again, that's bringing in that two-way street, who's in that conversation, who has to be informed. So the idea is looking at through, if you can see on the column, it's really bringing in each of those levels of the spectrum, how you might think about filling out a RACI. So that's sort of just a little preview. We'll talk about it more, but just trying to blend both project management and engagement. So. And with that, Meg, I don't know if you want to close it out.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I think at the end here, um, if y'all have other ideas for what should go in the handbook, please shout it out or put it in the chat. We're trying to get to a pretty solid start so that when we have the summit this fall, there's some resource that people can jump in and start doing a community engagement plan. So with our we can formally close here and just say another huge thank you to Sarah Fox for coming. There are lessons in your work, Sarah, that are really going to stay with me and so many of us I know. And if you'd like to informally chat for the next 5 minutes to tell us what else should go in the handbook or any other work you'd like us to be aware of, any other requests for future meetings, we'll stay on another 5. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you both.
Thanks, everyone.